Welcome to Part the System, and today I'm with Mark Lawrie, CEO of Street Games in the UK. How are you going, Mark?
I'm very well, David. Really well. Nice to be here.
And what time is it there in the UK?
It is 10 to 8 in the morning, and you wouldn't believe it, but the sun's shining and there's an immaculate blue sky. So, yeah, very odd after a bank holiday.
Well, it's raining over here, so there you go. Here in Sydney. So I just want to provide a little bit of your background and bio, Mark, and then we'll get into it. So yeah, Mark's got a background in education and local authority sports development. And you originally joined Street Games, I think it's in infancy in 2008, managing the National Young Volunteers Programme. And then around 2011, you became the founding chief executive of the new independent county sports partnership, Get Berkshire Active, where you worked on the legacy of the London 2012, across the country. So that must have been fantastic. And then you returned to Street Games as the deputy chief executive in 2013 when the organisation secured a whopping 20 million to deliver 1,000 neighbourhood doorstep sports clubs. So we might talk a little bit about that today. And then you took over. You were subsequently in the role of acting chief executive in 2019, and then was appointed the permanent chief exec in December 2020. Now, I've known you for quite a while, Mark. We haven't spoken that much, but I know that you are passionate about the power of sport and physical activity to impact upon the lives and aspirations of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. So I think working at Street Games is the perfect organisation for you, and we'll get into that in a minute. But you were just telling me you're quite happy at the moment because your team, Ipswich, has been promoted, right?
Yeah, fantastic weekend, David. An amazing season. Actually, just shows the power of determination. My little football club managing to make it back to the Premier League. So, yeah, a very good season for us.
Good to hear. Back in the big time. Let's hope you can stay there. Excellent. All right. Well, we'll get into it. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so unusually with an accent like this, I was actually born to two Scottish parents back in the 70s. And probably one of the earliest connections I have with Street Games is that I was born and brought up in a council house. We didn't have a huge amount of money. I always remember watching my mum counting pennies out of her purse to pay for things like mints in the butchers when I was a kid. But one of the things that made a huge difference to me was that during summer, particularly, me and my brother would just go down the field. We would play football, cricket, whatever we wanted to all day. And even though we didn't really have very much, you could turn the local park into Wembley or Lords, or I'm probably one of the only people that's ever broken into behavioural difficulties school because we used to go and use the tennis court, my brother and I, and we would get under the fence and take a couple of very old wooden rackets and play tennis. And so I was lucky, I suppose, that as a kid I had parents who were just brilliant. I mean, they'd moved 600 miles from Aberdeen down to the south of England, hence the accent. And they made sure that I was supported to have a really good education, which kind of set me on the path, I guess, to becoming a teacher and then ultimately to what I do now.
Yeah, brilliant. And it just shows you, doesn't it, with, you don't need a lot of money or, you'd come from affluent parents to be involved in sport and how powerful it can be. And it sounds like you had a wonderful experience there, which we'll come back to, and how that's kind of shaped your thinking. But yeah, tell us a little bit about Street Games, first of all.
So we're a UK charity. We were set up in 2006, founded by an incredible individual called Jane Ashworth, founding chief exec. And Jane, when she founded Street Games, had actually been working in government. She'd been working on secondment from Sport England in the office of the Deputy Prime Minister under the Blair government. And at that point, it was all about how sport could play a role in regenerating communities. So those areas, the most deprived areas around the UK, where perhaps there are lots of challenges, not just sporting challenges, but where sport and physical activity can absolutely make a difference to the lives of children and young people who grow up with very little money. And street games set up for that purpose, really, to bring sport and physical activity to the doorstep of kids with no money in some of the tougher communities around the UK. And the way that we've worked since day one, we started probably day one with around 15 local organisations in our network, as we call it. And those organisations operate right in the heart of deprived communities. Some of the areas you'd know well, and one of them was in Knowsley when we first started at the New Deal for Communities area there. And we've grown, I suppose, from there to a network now, which is around 15 or 1600 predominantly across England and Wales, with a handful of organisations in Scotland. But what we are absolutely still true to is bringing sport to young people that don't have much. And right now, with the cost of living crisis in the wake of the pandemic and with all the challenges that young people face, it feels like the work that we do to support these locally trusted organisations, as we call them, has never been more important.
Incredible. And, we hear a lot about place-based working these days, but there's a lot of buzzwords around there. But what does that mean to you? And could you give us some practical examples of that in some of the communities that you work in?
Yeah, I mean, we're an organisation with place at our heart because we only work in the most deprived communities across the UK. We understand, I suppose, the nature of neighbourhoods, the nature of communities. And place-based working for me is really about the importance of connecting people at a local level. The biggest piece of work that we do as an organisation is to connect the amazing leaders who run these community projects into the bits of the system that surround them. So whether that's helping to connect them to the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, whether that's helping to connect them into children's services so that they can benefit from some of the resources that are available for holiday provision. Place-based working, I always say, I agree with you, it is a buzzword. It is about connection. It's about people being connected. And increasingly, actually, over the last few years, what we've managed to do quite successfully is also connect these local organisations to each other. Because very often they'll work in their neighbourhood and they'll be 7 days a week, feels like 24 hours a day, supporting young people in their communities, and they don't have time to lift their heads. So actually part of place-based working for me is about getting your head up and understanding who else is trying to do what I'm trying to do and how might we work together to make it easier.
And, hear a lot nowadays around systems leadership, working across the system. It sounds like the work that Street Games has been doing is connecting and building relationships. That's something that's kind of part of your philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about being a national to local organisation. So whereas when you look at a systems diagram, I suppose, and you've got everything from the national down to the individual level, we try and work between the tiers. So to give you an example, some of the work we've done in the last couple of years with the Ministry of Justice has been about influencing government around how sport could play a role in crime reduction to unlock resources at that national level, but then to support all the way down through the system at a regional level and then at a community level, so that over 200 organisations, in the case of the Youth Justice Sport Fund, were then able to deliver to over 12,000 young people a programme of sport and mentoring that helped them to get involved in a positive pathway. And I suppose for me, understanding the language of systems, understanding the way that the system looks is also about understanding where the connections need to be. And very often I fear the connections up and down through the system are not necessarily as good as they can be. And that's part of the role that we've taken on over the past 15 years.
Wow, so it's very much looking at the different intersection points of supporting the wider system, I suppose. So you're doing a lot of advocacy and lobbying, it sounds like, and politically, but also, you're delivering on the ground, in communities, and some of which are the most disadvantaged communities in the UK. Brings me back to my days working in Hartlepool and through the New Deal for Communities. So I'm getting very excited talking about listening to what you're saying, Mark. To be honest, it's really great. And you mentioned there about crime reduction, for example, but how can sport and physical activity as a sector contribute to the wider system?
I think if I think back, you'll probably remember this. There was originally a program when I was working in local government called Positive Futures that was set up
Yeah.
back in the
Oh.
early 2000s, and that was very intentional. I mean, that had 110 million pounds a year of Home Office money to work in around 100 places around England and Wales to deliver crime reduction through sport. And I think at that stage, what we were talking about was kind of diversionary. It was about, let's try and get these young people off the streets and into something that's a bit more positive, which has its merit, and so much of that still goes on. I think the shift that particularly we've made, I suppose, in the last 10 years is to understand that in order to really influence these big parts of the system like criminal justice, you have to develop the evidence base. And we've worked really hard with Loughborough University over the past 9 years, actually, to really understand what is it about sport and physical activity that plays a part in crime reduction. Yes, there's a diversionary aspect to that, but what we've come to understand over time in the work we've done with Loughborough and the police and crime commissioners is that it's more than that. It's about intentionally designing sport so that it has a set of ingredients that will support people towards what we call a pro-social rather than antisocial identity. And even though you can get buried in the science of that a little bit, this is the way we're increasingly finding that you unlock the support of other parts of the system, because you present the case for sport in a way that talks their language and in a way that shows them that they can invest in sport, and it will absolutely do things like reduce serious violence, or it will play a role in changing the lives and putting young people on a pro-social path.
See, I love these conversations because I always learn new things, and I hadn't heard that pro-social, and that's a bit of a reframe, isn't it? So is that obviously looking at it more from strength-based, positive? Has that been around for a long time? Have I been hiding under a rock? I don't know.
No, I don't think so. I mean, you'll probably remember, David, the whole Positive Futures conversation was predicated on risk and protection. So the risks that young people might face, and then sport as a protection factor. I think the pro-social language has probably emerged in the last 5 or 6 years, particularly because police, for example, have moved to a child-centered policing model. So rather than talking about young people as a collective issue, they've started thinking about what are the needs of young people as individuals, and that moves us from a conversation about diverting them to supporting them to take away this issue they've got, possibly in the factors that create an antisocial identity and become more pro-social.
Love it, love it. That's really interesting. And how do you think about the relationship between like inactivity and inequalities?
Well, I mean, if you look at the active lives data over here, it's really stark. I mean, it's the gap is not getting any narrower. Um, there are multiple reasons for that. One thing we would say about the children and young people we speak to, and we did a really big piece of research last year with 1,000 young people from low income backgrounds, and it's not a lack of desire. Like 78% of them said they wanted to play sport and be active, and very often when it comes to coming from a low income background, there are factors that include not having access to sport near where you live, not having the right kit, not feeling like a club or a leisure centre is for you because you don't recognise it as a place you would go. And all of those factors play into inactivity levels. for young people, particularly from low income background. And cost is one of those. Yeah, not having any money is clearly a barrier, but there are lots of other issues and reasons why there are lower levels of activity. What's interesting actually is, ironically, when you look at the data that includes walking and cycling for young people from low income backgrounds are not that inactive because they
Yeah.
have to walk everywhere because they haven't got any money
Yeah.
for the bus and their parents probably can't give them a lift. But when you hit the point that they're kind of old enough to drive and they start driving, that activity level, or getting the bus, that activity level drops off a cliff because they're not involved in sport and learning the benefits of being physically active in that way.
Yeah. Absolutely, agree with that. And it's interesting when you think about, I suppose, poverty, and we know that levels of destitution is increasing in the UK and Australia as well. But I think it's increasing at a more of a rapid rate, really, in the UK. What does poverty impact physical activity? And I know you've given some examples there, but uh, yeah, what comes up for you there when you're in a lot of these communities, and is there any positives to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's some hugely positive things. We've been running the holiday activities and food program in Birmingham for the last 4 years, which is all about making sure that, particularly during the summer, young people who live in poverty have access to healthy food, but also physical activity. And
Mm.
that for me has just been eye-opening. I mean, we've worked with around 30,000 young people in summer holidays in Birmingham. Birmingham's
Jeez.
got a really high proportion of young people living in poverty. But what you actually see as you do it over a number of years is that you start off by providing physical activity and healthy food, and young people come, their parents drop them off. But over time, we've actually seen parents coming out into community spaces and saying things like, I never really felt safe here, but now that you're here and running these sessions, I feel like
Mm.
I can come out. And you see whole families that maybe have been quite isolated, have stayed in their accommodation for fear of what they think is happening on the streets around them, coming
Hmm.
out, getting involved in the cooking as well as involved in the physical activity. So from that point of view, that feels really positive. I mean, we shouldn't be naive. I don't think sport is not the answer to poverty.
Hmm.
Sport cannot fix the structural issues, as we both know, that exist around poverty, that include things like poor housing and lack of employment, those kinds of things. But what sport does, and particularly for young people, is it just makes it better. If you live in tough circumstances, having the opportunity to go and do something that, God forbid, might actually be fun is really positive. That's it takes you away from the day-to-day nature of the challenge
Hmm.
of living in poverty. And for
Hmm.
parents, it's a godsend because so many of the parents we talk to, they're delighted that their children are safe. They're delighted that their children are with trusted adults that they know are having a positive impact on them. They're
Hmm.
pleased that they're active, and they do need respite. I mean, a lot of the working popular or the people who live in poverty over here, over 65% of them are working, which
Hmm.
probably means they're working two jobs just to survive. So having a bit of a break from the kids is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, and I really take your point that sport can't fix every social issue, and poverty being one of those. But we've certainly got a lot of opportunity, which you've kind of mentioned there, and then that goes back to my question, about how we can contribute to that wider system because we've got a fantastic product, haven't we? So yeah, and I think we've got a lot of opportunity as well, and we could be doing a lot more, really.
Mm,
So there's no doubt amazing work that's actually going on, but I do feel that sometimes, and that's through my own lived experience, I think, that I bring to the table, which is, what we all do, bring our
mm,
own experiences. You mentioned about New Deal for Communities, and that's like 20 odd years ago, and it feels like now are we flipping kind of back to that, maybe in some respect, but what else is kind of emerging through your work? You've been doing this stuff for a long time, but is there anything new that is kind of innovating and yeah, that'd be good to share?
I mean, I think one of the things that's grown enormously in the last 2 or 3 years, when I first started with Street Games, you mentioned it earlier, actually, I worked on our youth leadership program that was funded by the Cooperative Group, which was an amazing experience. And that was all about giving young people the tools to provide sport for younger children in their communities. I think we're making a really exciting shift over the last 3 years to putting young people in charge a bit more.
Mm.
And the work we've been doing around youth voice and youth leadership in recent years, like I've been so regularly upstaged by young people on platforms over the last 3 years. It's been fantastic, and young people who are given the support and the courage to tell their own stories and share their own truths are just far more powerful than you or I trying to lobby the system or lobby government. I've sat alongside young people who are basically demanding the right to have sport and physical activity in their communities in a far more compelling way, because they can say things that we can only talk about as case studies. So
Mm.
one young man from the northeast, TJ, that we've done some work with, I met him on one of our residentials up in the Lake District about 3 years ago. And he's sat in Parliament now and he's said to MPs, look, I was stealing cars. I was hanging around with the wrong young people. Getting into this boxing club and being involved in this has not only given me a positive thing to do, but now he's looking at a career in doing social media around professional boxing. So we've done some
Mm.
work with Matchroom so that he can go in and he can do all the social media work around their fights. Now, that for me is a shift, because we're starting to, rather than speaking on behalf of young people, which has probably been the case for a long time, we try and
Mm.
amplify their voices, putting them at the forefront of the conversation and allowing them to tell their story a lot more powerfully feels really important. And the way that translates then down to the day to day is about organisations, the community organisations I talked about, thinking about, well, how do we put young people more in charge? How do we enable their voice and the things they want to happen more at a local level? And it's not easy, because your adult instincts are all saying to you, oh, no, I know best. I can do this. It's a lot harder, but it does feel genuinely innovative, and it does feel like the right direction, I think, for the sector.
Mm. Yeah, so I'm hearing you. It's about, empowering, giving them agency, creating the conditions for them to thrive, really, and which is fantastic. So that's really good to hear, Mark. With I suppose with we've talked a little bit about systems and the different parts of where we can try and influence. But if there was one part of the system that you could nudge to enable more people to be active, and I know that's a bit counterintuitive because systems is many things, but
Mm.
if you could just think about that, and if we were trying to get more people active, what would that be?
I think the one that collectively we still haven't cracked is the health part of the system. Like
Mm.
the before the pandemic, the incidence of poor mental health among young people from deprived areas was 3 times that of those from more affluent areas. Since the pandemic, we all know there's been a tsunami of poor mental health. And it's almost like we see all the right things written. So the chief medical officers say 60 minutes a day for
Mm.
children and young people, 30 minutes a day or 150 minutes a week for adults. Um, but what we haven't done is turn that system lever into a genuine commitment to physical activity and sport. Because
Mm.
it when you take a view like Michael Marmot does
Mm-hmm.
about the wider determinants of health, which I know you'll know about, sport can play a role not just in physical well-being, but in all those other factors that determine health. So employment and employability, mental well-being, the development of the individual in terms of their self-esteem and confidence, social cohesion. One of the biggest factors, I listened to him recently that he was talking about, was one of the biggest factors in poor mental health is a lack of connection with others. And
Yeah.
the power of sport and physical activity in terms of doing things in teams and groups and is just enormous. And we've not unlocked that yet. I don't know why, because it's written down, but we haven't managed to we haven't managed to connect with the systems that we need to in the way that we need to. And it's all, I mean, it's interesting with integrated care boards over here now, obviously, and integrated care systems. I think there's a will, but there are so many things that get in the way from a health perspective of taking a preventative approach. But if I had my magic wand, that would be the one to change for me.
I think that's a big one, a big lever there to change things. And you mentioned about that, I suppose mental health, maybe loneliness, reducing social isolation, they're types of things that obviously contribute to mental health and good general well-being. Back to kind of, one of your products, which is Doorstep Sports, and something that I've always been kind of really inspired by. And I remember there was some principles around that, around place and can you just talk to those? Because I think there are some really guiding pillars, if you will, of when you're working in communities.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Doorstep Sport, Jane coined the term, our founder and chief exec, probably way back in 2009. And initially it was about four things. We called them the four rights. And that was about right time. So particularly with teenagers, don't do it first thing in the morning because they won't be out of bed. Right place, to your point, which is absolutely has to be local and has to be somewhere that they identify as being the place that they want to go, not the place that you think is the right one for them. Right style, and this is really quite difficult sometimes to get your head around, and it's been the subject of our training academy for the last 13, 14 years. It's about creating a sufficient level of informality that young people want to engage, but a sufficient level of structure that they keep engaging. So it's making it feel like it's theirs, but also running it well enough that they want to turn up again next week. So that's right style, and then right price. And there's a long-standing debate, and there's an academic debate about whether you should offer activities for free. My experience and about yours is that for some of the families we work with, if you don't offer it for free, they can't come. We have seen things in recent years that I never thought I would see around kids turning up sessions with no shoes, and like things that you just cannot. It's almost like Victorian levels of poverty in some cases again, which is really quite a scary thing. So those were the four rights: right time, place, style, and price. The fifth right, and the one that actually is probably the most crucial, we added back in around 2017, and that's on the back of the Doorstep Sport Clubs program. Actually, that's right people. And the right people are those trusted adults, the ones who are there for the children first and the sport and physical activity second. Because yes, absolutely, the sport matters, but what a lot of these young people need and want is somebody who is bothered about them rather than about whether or not they can cross a ball from the right wing into the box. So it's that fifth right that has made a real difference, I think. And it seems really simple. And again, with the work you did in Hartlepool, it's dead intuitive. But so often when you see things being provided, they don't take those five rights into account. And that's why they're not successful.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. It really, really speaks to my heart and those principles. It's funny, we did a co-design session recently for a Pacifica community and that we deliver, and they've come up with the 6 Fs. I won't be able to remember them now, Matt, but I think it was free, food, flexibility, family, fun, and faith is important to that as well. So yeah, but listening to community is obviously really important, and then coming up with what programs right for them, I think is the key piece for me. And obviously you've been, doing this work for a long time and now chief exec and, just fantastic work that you guys are doing. But where do you see yourself personally in the system and how do you influence and contribute?
I suppose I try and maintain the role that Jane started of being a bit of a disruptor. Because even though I think like doorstep sport clubs you mentioned probably put street games into the mainstream, before
Mm,
that we were the disruptive teenager that everybody used to look at and say, oh, what are they making so much noise about? But even though I suppose we are now in mainstream circles, and I'm fortunate, given the organisation I work for, to be invited into parliamentary roundtables and all the other things that we get to do, I still see my role as to passionately fight for the rights of kids with no money in a system that still mitigates against them. Now, doing that
right.
obviously in the right way and building relationships and looking for collaborations. I mean, we're a member of the Sport for Development Coalition,
Yeah.
and we're one of the founder members of that organisation. And I really believe that one organisation, one individual in my case, can't do it all, and so creating the right alliances that create the right story that will hopefully turn the levers of the system feels really important. My personal, I never got into this idea of a personal mantra, but
Mm,
I did a leadership course a few years ago, and the one that I wrote down was make every life better, which sounds very grand, but actually as part of a philosophy, it's about, for me, it's about people are the thing that make the difference. So every
mm,
time I get a chance to support a person to do what they're doing better, particularly if it aligns to my kind of values around helping those who need the greatest help, then
mm.
that's where I'll put my energy. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I don't think I haven't got a 10-year plan. It's not really me. I've never had a 10-year plan, but I do believe in doing things that make a difference and, if necessary, being disruptive to get there.
Being disrupted with compassion. I think that's coming across fit from you and definitely helping those most in need. Absolutely with the work that you do. You haven't got a 10-year plan, but what does the next 12 months look like for street games?
I think it's going to be really interesting, actually. We obviously have a general election at some point.
We've just had the
Um,
local elections as well. Is it very
yeah,
interesting?
it's hugely changing political landscape from what we've had over the past 14 years. It is very interesting. Won't go too far into that as an apolitical organisation, but I think what we're concerned about, I suppose, is the pressures in the system that, particularly for large statutory bodies, are so great at the moment, and the impact that may have on the local community organisations we work for and the young people they
Mm,
work with. Because we've already seen, we've seen a number of local authorities in
mm,
England kind of issuing Section 114 notices. Now, having worked for a local authority for 10 years, what that will mean is they will have to look inwardly to restructure themselves. And the
yeah.
risk for me then is in the organisations they support in their communities. We have to find a way to build a bridge for the next 12 months until there's a level of political certainty. Now, in every challenge, there's an opportunity. If we are going to get a change of government, which looks increasingly likely, there's an opportunity to use that change moment to really influence and to share the power of sport and physical activity for what looks like it would be a well-being agenda. When you look at some of the things that are in the papers that Labour are talking about, if they're successful, it's very much more a well-being approach. So that
Mm,
talks, as we've already discussed today, that talks so well to so much of what we do, so much of what
mm,
sport and physical activity can do. So I think I had a conversation with my kind of team of senior managers last week, and it was about the next 12 months, and it was all about risks and opportunities. And there are, it feels, some really big risks around at the moment, and not just for us as an organisation, but for the whole system. But whenever you've got that, you've also got opportunity to shape, to change, to make a real difference in the way that things are taken forward. So I'm excited. I think there's a lot to look forward to.
I'm excited too, and it makes me, feel like there's obviously a big pull for me, being from England. So, if I ever did come back, Mark, would you give us a job? Street Games, because yeah, it's an organisation that I just, I love the work that you do, and there's definitely a little bit of Street Games in collective leisure and our philosophy in the work that we do. So yeah, I might be knocking on your door at some stage.
We'll look forward to that. If we've got a job, I'm sure you'll be a great candidate for it, David.
Funny way to go about asking for a job. But anyway, there it is. I think I'd just like to take this opportunity, Matt, to say thanks for a wonderful conversation, and really, really enjoyed that, and getting to unpack a little bit more about you and your journey and the tremendous work that you do. But is there anything else that you'd like to touch on that we've missed before we finish up?
No, I don't think so. Just thank you for the opportunity. It's been a great start to my day. I'll look forward to the rest of it.
Brilliant, and yeah, I hope Ipswich stay up next year. So enjoy that, and I hope to catch up with you in person soon. Okay.
Thanks, David. All the best.
Thanks, Mark. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.